So let me sort of take a step back. I'm going to answer the question and sort of talk about our equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy, which is buttressed or built upon three sort of guiding principles. One, we want to build culture so that our folks can bring their authentic selves to work. Second, we seek to recruit, retain, develop, and advance diverse talent throughout our company. And of course, we want to achieve better business results. In service of that, we have four diversity pillars: race, ethnicity, gender equity, LGBTQIA, and veterans. And so the why, so that tells you sort of what we've been doing for a long period of time. But the why is, you spoke to it, really touched on it initially, which is we have a tremendous platform, 41 markets, 61 stations, to foster or cultivate a conversation that will help folks gain understanding, maybe embrace empathy. So it's part of, being good citizens, I think, of our world, of the United States, certainly, a way to just present it and have discussions, much like some of these conversations that folks are having in their home, maybe with loved ones, maybe with friends, maybe with folks that have opposing viewpoints, but it's causing those conversations, which is critically important.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, I was really struck by the video and how at one point in the diversity training, the man was asking us to take a hard look at ourselves, to sit down with someone that we love and trust, and ask that person what biases do they think we have. And when I heard that, I internally said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let somebody else do that. So it really takes a great deal of courage, and it takes a great deal of trust to admit one's vulnerability. I'll just add my own personal story to this. I am very proud to say that I am a blood relative. I know I'm close to a cousin who has won a Super Bowl. He was on a Super Bowl winning team. And yet I also noticed when I was grading in my classes, athletes, I was giving them lower grades. And I thought to myself, how could that be? My cousin won a Super Bowl. But when I checked and looked at their grades, I realized they were a half a grade or sometimes a full grade lower. So I decided to really look at myself and say, what can I do to reduce my implicit bias? And so I tell my students now that when they have a paper, this is the paper, I fold over the top so I don't know who's written the paper. And I really focus on what's the content of the paper. But that was something that I'd been teaching for 20 years, and I was still very reluctant to admit. But once I did, I had a better relationship with my students, and I think a better relationship with the craft of teaching.
So there's several aspects of it. The first is that a lot of people want to make this much more complex than it is. When I was watching earlier, it kind of felt to me like Bill Nye, the Science Guy of racism. Maybe it was the bow tie, I don't know. But it seemed like he was taking something that a lot of people find complicated and just breaking it down for you. This is what we're talking about. He had graphics you could understand. He had a little humor in there. And that's what it felt like, just breaking down an idea that a lot of people find complex. To me, what it comes down to, especially from my point of view as a rabbi, is not just education, but moral education. When we think of the idea that that person, whatever they look like, is created in the image of God, I have to have respect for that person, not as they are as a person, as they appear to me, as they look different than me. Each and every person I meet on a daily basis is created in the image of the Lord. And when I look at a person, that has to be reflected in how I treat them.
That as a black man, that had to be a whole nother level for you. Paint the picture for me.
Yeah, as I watched the video discussion, it took me back to this duality that we live in, and in corporate America, we live in two worlds. So if we don't speak the King's English, if we don't enunciate or articulate effectively, then we're constantly fighting these stereotypes and these perceptions about us that are constantly put in front of us through media, publications, and even through how we're educated. So the stress of being in corporate America, not only are you fighting the issues of psychological safety. You know, when you walk into a conference room and you're the only African American person, male or female, or only Latinx person, only Asian, you know, all these triggers began to start sounding off, and all of these questions of psychological safety began to start swirling in your consciousness. Do I feel safe here? Do I belong here? Do I have a future here? And to live under the constant stress emotionally, and wondering, are you good enough to be here? Are you educated enough? Do you fit in? How do they perceive you? Corporate America has its own stressors with trying to maximize shareholder wealth and all the reasons why we're in business, right? But put on top of that, that you're constantly fighting and constantly dealing with self-image, and you're constantly redefining your brand. We were working on branding far before it became popular in pop culture, because when you walk into the halls of corporate America and in the conference rooms and boardrooms, you are constantly, having to deal with, how do they perceive me in order to accept me, that I might have a seat at the table? Because the reality is, if we're not at the table, then we're on the menu.
Emily, as a millennial, how do you feel and when I'm saying that, those of us who are older than you are, how do we see or treat millennials differently? Your peers on campus who maybe are experiencing questioning about sexuality, or maybe have other issues. How is it that how is there a dichotomy, do you see it, between how folks on our side, our age group, are handling and relating to millennials? Because you are the up and coming group coming into the workforce, meeting all of us sort of head on.
Well, obviously I've only seen it from like my side. but there is like a lot of, I have seen a lot of disillusionment among my age group when looking towards the future and looking towards older generations, because like when my age group in general, like when we look at the world, some of us feel like we were never adequately prepared for it. Like we did everything our parents told us, now what? But I also think there has been a bigger push for us to just be present, because you said, like, you know, like people of color, LGBT people, have been becoming more prominent just in the public space. I had this professor, and I was talking to her after class once about like, you know, I'm trying to be like, you know, like an activist and like champion for progress, but it gets tiring sometimes having to like trying to like find the political and everything. And I'll never forget, she said, just being there and being you, that is political. Like your presence is helping. Your presence is doing what you're aiming to accomplish.
And Emily, I'll tell you, it doesn't stop. When you get older, I had that conversation with a colleague, and I said, you know, sometimes I just get tired. You get tired of kind of like banging your head against the same brick wall. But you have to keep on. And like he told me, he said, you know what, Dia, bang your head one more time, pick yourself up, and go back out and do what you do. And that's just a part of it. That's kind of what we have to do. But again, and I want to say that we did have a little bit of some audio issues. The facilitator, he kept making a comment, and he said that there were two things. He said that we needed to remember that we live in society and we have a brain, and that's what creates or causes us to continue to maintain or perpetuate these biases. And I thought it was interesting when he was, and Dr. Brown, you spoke to this about when you grade, you blindly grade your papers. What do you think about in employment, blindly employing or blindly recruiting people and not looking at the names? Because I can tell you, I remember distinctly when I went for a job interview years ago. And of course, my name is Dia, D-I-A, Davidson, D-A-V-I-D-S-O-N. And so I guess, at worst, I could have maybe been Hispanic because El Dia for day. And at best, Jewish, Rabbi, son of David, Davidson, right? And then I graduated from a white institution, University of Georgia. I was a member of a white sorority, and there was a white young lady sitting there in the lobby alongside me. And when the recruiter came out, she just honed in on the white young lady and said, Dia Davidson? And I was like, no, over here. And you could see her face kind of look like, say what? And we went along with the interview. Do you think these are the things that we need to teach our young people, that they have to mask who they are? Is the bias, is it so prevalent in our society that we have to do these types of dances, if you will, in order to be accepted or to be viewed for who we are versus who people think we are?
That's a terrific question. It's a terrific question. And I really do have to hand it to Emily, because her generation really is calling, I hope you won't, well, I hope the FCC won't violate you, but calling the previous generations on our bullcrap. And I was going to go in a different direction. And because
the pastors will pray for us.
Because, and a specific thing that I will help to, that speaks to employment. Emily's generation is saying, what are the biases that people are bringing to the table that is keeping their members of their generation from thriving? And speaking to the issue of employment, one of the things that the Obama administration did, and I'm going to hope that Biden does as well, is convince major employers to not ask people if they have a felony. Because just checking that box, yes, I have been convicted of a felony, not I personally, but I know people who have. And their opportunities for jobs are completely taken away because they have been convicted of a felony, even when a corporation says, by ticking this box, we will not look at your application any differently. But the bias, the implicit bias training tells us that that's in fact what happens. So people who may have been convicted of selling marijuana when they were 16 years old, they have a felony now, and that makes it difficult for them to get a job at Walmart, or a job, or perhaps join the armed forces or get financial aid. I remember the Obama administration was trying to convince companies to really focus on their own implicit bias. And one of the things that the video says is that by judging people, particularly African-American young men, by these stereotypes, we're cutting off avenues of employment and wealth building and entrepreneurship and education for them. So Dia, I completely understand why that would take you by surprise. You came to that interview saying, I am qualified, I have a degree, I'm ready to take on the world. And this person is telling me before I can even get into the interview that I might be somehow inferior, that I'm not someone that she expects to do well. And I think that walking around with that burden is incredibly stressful. And so to go back to Emily, we're hopefully people of my generation, I like to think of myself as being entering young or late young adulthood, that what we're trying to do is really examine these biases and take some of the burden off of them.
Well then, Danielle, I'll throw it back to you. You guys at Scripps inherited me when you all purchased our station. So what's the deal when people come in for employment? I remember in the beginning, in the early years, we had to do those little EEO things where you check a box and say, which, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other. Is that how we do it? Is that how corporate America is still doing it as far as hiring? And are there quotas? Can we say that word? When, applicants come in, how do you handle that?
So you are leveraging both hats that I wear this evening. So I'm so proud, both the employment lawyer side as well as the chief diversity officer side. And may I also say that my cohorts, my co-panelists have just been what they've said has been spot on between dual consciousness and millennials. And when I think about, our workforce is 33% millennial. And that's the largest demographic in our workforce. So Emily, stay in the game. Because your presence matters. My folks, the Xers, we're a second by a long shot in terms of the next largest demographic. In terms of what we do, I can obviously speak specifically about Scripps, but it's really most like a lot of other companies, which is when you want to disclose, you can voluntarily disclose identifying information. It's not a requirement. So like race and ethnicity, that's a voluntary disclosure. Much like veteran status, if you were in the military, that's a voluntary disclosure. We offer that opportunity. As you may recall, we had a Stand Up and Be Counted campaign at Scripps back in June, July of last year. Race and ethnicity is a repository of information that we collect, as well as gender. That's obviously a different story because, one of our pillars is LGBTQIA, and, gender is not binary. It's not man or woman. It's more than that. I did want to sort of pivot back to, so what do you do? I mean, there are a whole arsenal of tactics that you can deploy. There are anonymizing resumes, much like what you said. I believe Dr. Brown talked about hiding the names. For example, if you look at my resume, it's not just my name, it's also organizations that I'm a member of that could identify my racial ethnic background. I'm a member of a sorority, Delta Sigma Theta. I'm a member of the Links, all these other things, which if you peel the onions of the layer, you can very quickly surmise, potentially what my racial ethnic background is. Other tactics include diverse slates, ensuring that when a hiring manager gets a slate of candidates, that it includes diverse talent. It's just a variety of techniques that employers can lawfully use to ensure that we advance diversity in the workplace.
Rabbi, let me ask you this. I always say that we're doomed to repeat mistakes if we don't know our history. Would you agree? Because in history, there were those who wanted to say the Holocaust didn't happen, but we know it did. There are those who want to minimize the violence and the tragedy of slavery. There are those in pop culture, Kanye West, who wanted to say that Black folks came to America out of choice, that we immigrated. It was forced. What do you say to young people there on the campus who are questioning history and who maybe aren't as familiar with history? How do you guide them?
So I think we live in the golden age of being informed if you want to be informed. Every kid on campus carries an encyclopedia with them all the time. Now, I'm not going to hate on teachers, but my math teacher promised me I wouldn't carry a calculator everywhere I went. Okay, that was a lie. I have one with me all the time now. So if you want to be informed, it's the easiest time in the world to be informed, and yet we're seeing growing ignorance. So there's the old joke that the pastor asked the man in the chapel, are you ignorant or apathetic? He says, I don't know and I don't care. So what is the reason for that ignorance? At this point, there is no one that denies the Holocaust out of lack of information. There's no one that denies the intentional destruction of a people by slavery in American history through lack of information. There's a reason they're saying that. And there's a thought among some that if I put down someone else, it lifts me up, that I can climb to a higher place on the back of someone else. And the fact is that's simply not true. One lesson that's always stuck with me, Mayor David Dinkins of New York, after the Sharpton riots, came to visit with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's my personal mentor and the foremost leader of world Judaism in the modern era. And he said, what can we do to bring the Jewish community and the Black community closer together? And the Rebbe said, you have to realize it is one community. It's two segments of one community. If you want to advance a community, you need to include all segments. The Rebbe said that you need to seek out the welfare of all particular sectors of a community to ensure the flourishing of the whole. One of the common examples I use with my students nowadays is Amanda Gorman. So she was a young woman who had some issues early in life. She had some learning deficiencies, etc., and her school invested in her. I don't think that same investment would have taken place 25 years ago. I just don't think that's the case. And the fact is, if it hadn't happened, she would have definitely been worse off. There's no question. But we as a nation would have been worse off. If we didn't have her at the inauguration, you and I and each one of us would have been worse off. And when we realized that by uplifting that young woman, we didn't just change her, we changed us. We benefited every single American, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of orientation. Everyone benefited by uplifting one child. And that's true with every person that we uplift as a society. So there's almost a selfishness to supporting people in your community, because you better yourself when you benefit the whole.
But it's a sad commentary, though, when we reel it back in and we talk about Ms. Gorman, that she said that when she was approaching her apartment, that a security guard questioned her to ask her, did she really belong there? She had to prove it. She had to not only pull out her door key after standing there in front of the Capitol, delivering this beautiful, eloquent speech, a poem, and being a Harvard graduate, she had to push in the code to prove that she belonged there. Dr. King, you are the father of two sons, two handsome African-American sons. What is your greatest fear and hope for them? Because the greatest bias that we saw in the presentation was, of course, towards the elderly, but also towards African American males. What's your greatest fear, your greatest hope, your greatest dream for them?
Wow. I think that's an extremely loaded question, but I'll answer it this way. My greatest fear is that every time I see my sons, that might be the last time. That's my greatest fear. Regardless of the situation, when they are not in my presence, they're not in my eyesight, there's a constant fear that the systems and the environment and culture of our country is not designed to protect or value their lives. And my constant fear is that every time I see them, that is my last time. That's my fear. My greatest hope is that there have been enough seeds deposited in them to give them a healthy identity of self, that in this generation, as they are in Emily's generation, that they can become their authentic selves, transparent and vulnerable, but yet authentic. And the world would celebrate them for the gifts that they are, and to celebrate the gifts that are in them as they begin to use their gifts, as Rabbi Litvin said, to be a blessing to the communities in which they live. That's my greatest hope.
Emily, what's your greatest hope? What is your greatest desire to see? Because we are kind of at the apex, I guess, of our careers. You're just at the beginning of yours. What is your greatest hope? What is your greatest desire? What is the thing that you hope you see happen in your generation that maybe we missed in ours?
Well, I think Reverend King put it very eloquently. I want us to go outside and not be scared. Because even with the progress that we've seen from one generation to the next, a lot of us are still scared to put ourselves out there and, be who we really are. And I don't think we're going to ever have total societal change or change in the way we see each other, until people can go out and, not be afraid to be who they feel.
And to be loved and respected for the individual and not be misjudged because of some false narrative that they may have heard or thought or seen. Thank you all so very, very much for this interesting perspective. We've been kind of all over the map, and I hope that those who have been listening in have enjoyed the conversation, but more so than that, take away from it some morsel that can germinate, and maybe that can sprout an idea or a change or a conversation in their own homes or their own communities or maybe even their own workplace. Until next time, as I always say, I'm Dia Davidson. Have a good night.